We just got the ruling. It is 92 pages long, and I'm scanning through it right now. But when I'm looking at these numbers, the totals that the judge is ordering collectively in the case, so this will include all of the defendants, I'm getting a total of $362 million. And I'm just scrolling through this now. I can see that there's the dollar amount specific to Donald Trump. I'm going to use a calculator to do some rough math. It gets us to, for Donald Trump, about $354 million. That's for him, the company, the Trump organization. So very close to what the New York Attorney General's office was seeking of $370 million. There's a lot of zeros here and a lot of other numbers, but roughly $354 million is the judgment against Donald Trump. The judge also found that his son, Eric Trump, is liable in the amount of $4 million. Donald Trump Jr. is liable in the amount of $4 million. And Alan Weisselberg, the former chief financial officer, is liable in the amount of $1 million. I haven't had a chance to read through the language of what the judge said here, but really this was about the money because...
It's John, and what I learned today shocked me. The $355 million fraud judgment against Trump is compounding daily with interest, now exceeding $500 million. The financial nightmare is growing with ruthless precision. Interest has been piling onto that judgment at a rate that defies comprehension. Approximately $87,000 to $89,000 per day. Every single day that passes without Trump writing a check, he owes almost $90,000 more than he did the day before. By the time you factor in the accumulated interest, the total judgment has ballooned to approximately $464 million, and it continues its inexorable climb toward $500 million and beyond. This isn't just a financial problem. This is an existential threat to everything Trump has built.
The judge had already found that Donald Trump, his sons, and Alan Weisselberg had engaged in fraud by issuing fraudulent financial statements, giving them to banks and insurers in order to obtain favorable rates. He ruled that before the trial, but we did go through a 3-month trial. The judge was looking to determine how much in ill-gotten gains, is what this word of disgorgement means, the money that they benefited from. So now the judge issuing the significant ruling, more than $350 million against Donald Trump and the Trump organization, and against the sons. Now, I'm going to just see if I can quickly search to see what the judge said about any ban. That was the other outstanding question here. I'm not able to find that very quickly, but that is another issue that we're looking for here of what the judge says about whether he's banning Trump from doing business or his sons. But this ruling, there was a question of whether the sons would be found to be liable because the judge said at the end of the trial, during closing arguments, he asked the Attorney General's team if he said he wasn't sure there was sufficient evidence against the sons. This ruling here indicating that he believes that they did at least receive improper profits and asking them.
What makes this situation so immediately dangerous for Trump's business empire is that the judge's ruling allows enforcement mechanisms to proceed even while Trump's appeals are pending. Normally, when you appeal a judgment, there's a stay that prevents the other side from collecting while the appeals process winds its way through the courts. But to get that stay, Trump would need to post a bond for the full amount of the judgment. That's not just showing you have the money somewhere. It's actually putting up collateral that guarantees payment if you lose the appeal. And Trump has apparently been unable or unwilling to post such a bond, which means New York Attorney General Letitia James has the green light to pursue enforcement right now. Let that sink in for a moment. Think about what this actually means in practical terms.
To disgorge that as a result of this case. This is a significant win for the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. She'd been investigating this case ever since Michael Cohen testified before Congress when he made this first allegation that Trump had inflated the value of properties to get better rates on loans and insurance and to pay less in taxes. So she is now justified by this finding by the judge. And again, this was a judge trial. This was not a jury trial. So we've been waiting for Judge Arthur Engorn to issue this ruling. And now we have it. We still have to continue to read through it. Our team is doing that as I speak. But, a real significant win for the New York Attorney General and a loss for Donald Trump in this case that goes to the heart of his reputation, the reputation that he was a successful real estate businessman, that he rode to the White House. The judge finding here that, there was fraud, there was liability, and saying that Trump needs to pay back more than $350 million. Boris Brianna?
Yeah, it goes so much to his identity. This is clearly one of the cases, one of the legal issues that he's facing that bothers him the most here.
The New York Attorney General can place liens on Trump properties, which would cloud the title and make it impossible to sell or refinance them without first paying off the judgment. She can pursue actual seizure and forced sale of properties to satisfy the debt. She can go after bank accounts, rental income streams, and other assets wherever she can find them. Trump Tower, the building that's been the symbol of Trump's success and the headquarters of his entire operation for decades, could theoretically be seized and sold to pay this judgment. 40 Wall Street, a major Manhattan office building, is specifically being targeted, according to James's public statements about where she's looking to collect. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, has said, "We will be prepared to deal with whatever enforcement actions come." But that statement rings hollow given the apparent liquidity problems Trump is facing. If he could easily post a bond and stop the enforcement actions,
as the Attorney General in New York had argued that it was the marketplace that was harmed here and was seeking to recoup this disgorgement or these ill-gotten gains. Let's go ahead and bring in Paula Reed, our chief legal correspondent, to talk about what she is seeing here with our understanding here, Paula, that this is really kind of hot off the presses, this ruling.
Yes, the paper is still warm, but we're going through it right now. And as you and Kara were talking about, this case is so personal because it represents such a threat to Trump's business, his family business, and his identity. Remember, it was his identity as a businessman that brought him fame before he arrived at the White House. But in looking at the summary of this ruling, we see in addition to the monetary penalties that Kara just laid out, they have found him liable for fraud, and they are going to continue the appointment of an independent monitor. So back in 2022, the judge installed a monitor to keep an eye on exactly what the Trump organization was doing when it came to its business dealings. Now, among the things this monitor uncovered were a $48 million loan, for example, to the company itself, but there was no paperwork. They couldn't really find any information. That was just one thing.
why hasn't he done so? The most logical explanation is that he doesn't have the cash or credit available to secure a bond of this magnitude. The cryptocurrency income we've discussed previously has provided some breathing room, but posting a nearly $500 million bond requires either having that much cash available or having enough unencumbered assets to use as collateral. Trump apparently has neither. The fraud judgment itself came from a case where Judge Arthur Engoron found that Trump had systematically lied about the value of his assets for years, inflating property values by hundreds of millions of dollars to get better loan terms from banks, better rates from insurance companies, and other financial benefits. The fraud wasn't a one-time mistake or a difference of opinion about valuations.
That came up. Now, Trump lawyers have insisted because they loaned the money to themselves, they didn't have the paperwork that they needed, and insist that the monitor has found no fraud. Now, the judge also here orders the installation of an independent director of compliance. But I also want to note that they are saying here, the judge is saying that they're going to limit the defendant's right to conduct business in New York for a few years. Now, it's probably going to take a few minutes before we unpack exactly what that means. That does not appear to be an indefinite ban, the so-called corporate death penalty, but it does appear that the judge is going to put some restrictions on Trump and the Trump Organization's ability to do business in the state of New York. But let's go back to the idea of this independent director of compliance. That appears to be maybe an executive level person who will ensure that they are being honest when evaluating their assets, when applying for insurance or loans from banks. Because, of course, that is what the judge here found Trump liable for last fall before this trial started. They said, you are liable for fraud. They believe that he was not honest about the value of his assets because he was trying to get more favorable terms from banks, from insurance companies.
There was a pervasive pattern of deception that infected Trump Organization financial statements over many years. As part of the judgment, Engoron also banned Trump from running businesses in New York State for 3 years, a remarkable sanction that reflects how egregious the court found his conduct to be. Trump's sons, Don Jr. and Eric, are also on the hook from related judgments. Each of them owes $4.7 million from their involvement in hotel and golf course transactions that were part of the fraudulent scheme. Alan Weisselberg, the former Trump Organization CFO, who served prison time for tax fraud, owes $1 million in severance that's being clawed back. The entire senior leadership of the Trump Organization has been found liable for participating in the fraud, and they're all facing personal financial consequences. The political implications of potential asset seizure are enormous. Trump's brand has always been built on the image of success and wealth. The buildings with his name on them, Trump Tower most prominently, are physical manifestations of that brand. Having those properties seized and sold by the state of New York to pay fraud judgments would be a humiliation that goes far beyond the financial impact. It would shatter the mythology that Trump has carefully constructed over decades about being a brilliant dealmaker and successful businessman. And it would provide Democrats with devastating imagery and talking points heading into upcoming elections. The timing of this threat coincides with everything else we've been covering. Trump is facing pressure from every possible direction simultaneously. And now, on top of all that, there's an active threat to seize his properties and forcibly liquidate his business empire. The approval ratings suggest the public is already souring on Trump, and watching his buildings get seized would only accelerate that decline. So let's break down exactly what enforcement mechanisms are available to Letitia James and how asset seizure would actually work. We're going to look at which properties are most vulnerable and what it would mean for Trump to lose them. We're going to examine whether Trump has any realistic options for avoiding seizure and why he hasn't posted the bond that would stop this process. And we're going to discuss the political and personal implications if the Attorney General actually follows through on her threat. Understanding how judgment enforcement actually works helps explain why Trump is in such a difficult position and why his options for avoiding this outcome are so limited. When someone loses a civil lawsuit and a judgment is entered against them, the winning party has various legal tools available to collect what they're owed. These enforcement mechanisms include wage garnishment, bank account seizure, liens on property, and ultimately forced sale of assets. The specific tools available depend on the jurisdiction and the type of judgment, but New York provides robust enforcement options that Letitia James can deploy against Trump if he doesn't pay voluntarily. The normal way to pause enforcement while appealing is to post an appeal bond, also called a supersedeas bond. This bond functions essentially as insurance that guarantees payment of the judgment if the appeal fails. It protects the winning party from having their judgment become uncollectible during the years it might take to resolve appeals. To post such a bond, you typically need to either deposit the full judgment amount in cash or have a bonding company guarantee payment, which requires providing collateral they can seize if needed. For Trump, posting a bond of nearly $500 million has apparently proven impossible or prohibitively expensive. Bonding companies that might guarantee such an amount would need to see collateral, unencumbered assets worth significantly more than the bond amount that they could seize if Trump loses and doesn't pay. Trump's claimed billions in assets apparently don't translate into the kind of liquid, unencumbered collateral that bonding companies require. Properties with mortgages don't work as collateral because the mortgage holder has priority. Volatile assets like cryptocurrency may not be acceptable. And Truth Social stock, whatever it's theoretically worth, is illiquid and restricted. Without a bond in place, James can pursue enforcement while appeals proceed. She's been clear and public about her intentions. She said directly that she will seek judgment enforcement and seize his assets if Trump doesn't pay. She specifically mentioned 40 Wall Street as a property she's watching, suggesting it may be among the first targets for enforcement action. The enforcement process would likely begin with placing liens on Trump properties. A lien is a legal claim against property that must be satisfied before the property can be sold or transferred. Once liens are in place, Trump couldn't sell or refinance those properties without first paying off the judgment. This alone would significantly constrain his financial flexibility, since selling or refinancing properties is often how real estate operators generate liquidity when they need cash. If liens don't produce payment, the next step would be actual seizure and forced sale of properties. This process varies by property type, but generally involves the sheriff or marshal taking control of the asset and conducting a sale, often at auction, with proceeds going to satisfy the judgment. These forced sales typically produce less than market value because buyers know the seller is distressed and has no ability to hold out for better offers. Trump could see properties worth hundreds of millions sold for a fraction of their potential value. The properties most vulnerable to seizure are those with significant equity, meaning substantial value above whatever mortgages or other liens already exist. If a property is mortgaged up to its full value, there's nothing for James to collect, even if she seizes it. The existing mortgage holders would have priority and would take all the proceeds from any sale. But properties with substantial equity represent targets where seizure could actually produce meaningful recovery toward the judgment. Trump Tower presents a complicated situation. The building's commercial space has suffered from high vacancies and declining rents. As we've discussed previously, its value may be significantly less than it was at Trump's peak, and there may be mortgages or other obligations that would have priority over James's judgment. But Trump Tower also has symbolic significance that goes beyond its financial value. Losing the building that bears his name and has served as his headquarters for decades would be a devastating blow to Trump's brand and self-image. 40 Wall Street is a major office building in Manhattan's financial district that James has specifically identified as a target. Office buildings in Manhattan have struggled since the pandemic with elevated vacancy rates and declining rents. The building's value may have decreased significantly from its pre-pandemic peak, but if there's equity in the property above existing mortgages, James could pursue it to satisfy part of the judgment. The Trump Organization's other New York properties, whatever equity exists in them, would also be potential targets. Golf courses, smaller buildings, and other assets could all be subject to liens and potential seizure. The cumulative effect could be to systematically strip away the real estate portfolio that's been the foundation of Trump's wealth and identity. The interest accumulation is a relentless factor working against Trump. At approximately $89,000 per day, every day of delay adds to what he owes. Over a year, that's more than $32 million in additional liability, just from interest. The longer Trump goes without paying or reaching a settlement, the deeper the hole gets. And there's no obvious way to stop the interest from running. It continues automatically as long as the judgment remains unpaid. Trump's sons face their own exposure from the related judgments. Don Jr. and Eric Trump each owe $4.7 million from their involvement in the fraudulent transactions. While these amounts are smaller than the main judgment against their father, they represent personal liability that could affect their own assets and financial futures. They could face their own enforcement actions, including liens on properties they own and seizure of other assets. Alan Weisselberg's situation illustrates how the Trump Organization's legal problems extend beyond just Trump himself. Weisselberg already served prison time for tax fraud related to his compensation arrangement with the Trump Organization. Now, he owes an additional $1 million that's being clawed back from severance he received. The systematic nature of the fraud, involving the company's CFO who cooked the books, the sons who participated in deals, and Trump himself who directed everything, shows this wasn't a rogue operation, but a company-wide culture of deception. The 3-year ban on Trump running businesses in New York that Judge Engoron imposed as part of the judgment has its own significant implications. Trump is currently president, so the immediate practical impact may be limited. He's not personally managing day-to-day business operations anyway. But the ban reflects the court's conclusion that Trump cannot be trusted to run businesses honestly and should be prohibited from doing so. That finding from a judge who reviewed extensive evidence and heard weeks of testimony speaks to fundamental questions about Trump's character and integrity. The appeals process that Trump is pursuing offers some hope of reducing or eliminating the judgment. But legal experts are generally skeptical that he'll succeed. The trial record established pervasive fraud through documentary evidence that's difficult to dispute. Trump's financial statements contained valuations that were demonstrably false, claiming Mar-a-Lago was worth many times what it could legally be sold for. inflating apartment square footage by thousands of feet, and similar fabrications across multiple properties. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, and appeals courts generally defer to trial judges' factual findings when they're supported by substantial evidence. The political implications of actual property seizure would be extraordinary. Imagine news coverage of sheriff's deputies or marshals entering Trump Tower to take control of the building. Imagine auction notices for properties bearing the Trump name. Imagine Trump forced to watch as his empire systematically dismantled to pay judgments resulting from his own fraud. The imagery would be devastating. The self-proclaimed billionaire genius stripped of his properties because he cheated and got caught. The enforcement threat is real and immediate because Trump has apparently been unable to post the bond that would pause collection while he appeals, meaning Letitia James can pursue asset seizure right now while the appeals process continues. This isn't a theoretical future possibility, it's an active present danger. The fact that Trump hasn't posted a bond suggests he either can't access nearly $500 million in cash or acceptable collateral, or he's making a calculated bet that James won't actually follow through. Given her public statements, that bet seems extremely risky. The daily interest accumulation of approximately $89,000 means the judgment keeps growing relentlessly every day that passes without payment, making Trump's financial hole deeper with each passing week and month. Over a year, that's more than $32 million in additional liability. The interest alone is adding the equivalent of a luxury home's value to what Trump owes every single day. This relentless accumulation creates enormous pressure to resolve the situation rather than let it continue indefinitely. The properties most likely to be targeted for seizure include Trump Tower and 40 Wall Street, which James has specifically mentioned, and any other properties where significant equity exists above existing mortgages. The iconic status of Trump Tower makes its potential seizure particularly devastating symbolically, even beyond whatever financial value it represents. Losing the building that's been his headquarters and the physical manifestation of his brand for decades would be a humiliation from which Trump's image might never recover. The fraud findings underlying this judgment reflect systematic dishonesty that pervaded the Trump organization for years, involving Trump personally, his sons, his CFO, and the entire company culture. This wasn't a single mistake or a reasonable disagreement about valuations. It was intentional fabrication of financial information to deceive banks and obtain benefits under false pretenses. Judge Engoron's 3-year ban on Trump running businesses in New York reflects how egregious he found the conduct to be. The political implications of actual property seizure would provide Democrats with devastating imagery and talking points heading into future elections, while further eroding Trump's brand as a successful businessman and dealmaker. The mythology Trump has constructed depends on the appearance of success. Having his property seized to pay fraud judgments shatters that mythology in ways that would be impossible to spin or deny. The bond posting failure is the critical detail that makes this situation so immediately dangerous. If Trump could post a bond, he could pause enforcement and fight through the appeals process without worrying about asset seizure. The fact that he hasn't done so after months of trying suggests he simply can't. That tells us something important about his actual financial position, that despite the crypto income and the claimed billions in assets, he doesn't have access to the liquidity or unencumbered collateral that posting such a bond requires. The enforcement process itself would unfold gradually but relentlessly if James proceeds. First would come liens on properties, clouding titles and freezing Trump's ability to sell or refinance. Then would come seizure proceedings, where properties are taken under court supervision. Then forced sales, likely at auction, where distressed conditions typically produce below market prices. Each step would be publicly documented and covered extensively by media, creating a slow-motion disaster for Trump's image and finances. The impact on Trump's ability to fund political operations deserves consideration. Presidential campaigns and political operations require enormous amounts of money. If Trump's assets are tied up in litigation, subject to liens, or being seized, his ability to self-fund political activities would be severely constrained. He'd become more dependent on outside donors, which creates its own complications and constraints. The financial pressure could affect not just his personal wealth, but his political viability. For the Trump Organization as an ongoing business, asset seizure would be existential. The company's operations depend on the properties it owns and manages. Losing major properties to forced sale would shrink the business dramatically. The brand damage from having Trump-named properties seized would affect licensing deals and other reputation-dependent revenue streams. The company might survive in some reduced form, but it would be a shadow of what it was. The son's personal exposure adds another dimension to the family's legal troubles. Don Jr. and Eric, each owing $4.7 million, means they could face their own enforcement actions affecting their personal assets. This isn't just their father's problem. They're personally liable for their participation in the fraudulent schemes. Their own properties, bank accounts, and other assets could be targeted if they don't pay their judgments. Trump's response options are limited and getting more limited as time passes and interest accumulates. He could try to settle with James for less than the full judgment, but she's shown no inclination to offer significant discounts. He could try to raise the money from outside sources, but borrowing nearly $500 million when your assets are already encumbered is extremely difficult. He could hope to win on appeal, but the evidence against him was overwhelming, and appeals courts rarely overturn such well-supported factual findings. The comparison to other real estate empires that have collapsed is instructive. History is full of once mighty real estate developers who overextended, faced judgments or market downturns, and saw their empires liquidated. Trump has presented himself as different, smarter, more successful, immune to the failures that befell others. Asset seizure to pay fraud judgments would prove he's not different at all, just another leveraged developer whose claims exceeded reality. Looking ahead, the enforcement timeline is largely in James's hands. She can proceed as quickly or slowly as she chooses within the legal framework. She's made clear she intends to pursue enforcement aggressively, which suggests we could see actual lien filings and seizure proceedings in the coming months rather than years. Every major step in that process would generate news coverage and remind the public of Trump's fraud conviction and financial distress. The psychological impact on Trump of losing properties that bear his name and that he's claimed as evidence of his success shouldn't be underestimated. Trump's self-image is deeply tied to these properties. He spent decades pointing to buildings with his name on them as proof of his greatness. Having them stripped away through forced sale to pay fraud judgments would be personally devastating in ways that go beyond the financial loss. This asset seizure threat represents one of the most immediate dangers to Trump's empire and his carefully constructed image. The enforcement mechanisms that James can deploy without waiting for appeals. The massive daily interest accumulation, making the hole deeper constantly. The iconic properties like Trump Tower that could be seized and sold. The underlying fraud findings showing systematic dishonesty, and the political implications of the self-proclaimed billionaire genius having his property stripped away to pay for his cheating. The numbers are genuinely staggering, and they keep getting worse with each passing day. The original judgment against Trump in the New York civil fraud case was $355 million in ill-gotten gains that he had to disgorge. Basically giving back the money he made through years of fraudulently inflating asset values to get better loan terms. But that was just the starting point. Interest has been accumulating on top of that judgment at a rate of approximately $87,000 to $89,000 per day. Every single day that passes without payment, Trump owes almost $90,000 more. By the time you factor in the accumulated interest, the total judgment has grown to approximately $464 million, and it's continuing to climb toward $500 million and beyond. And here's the thing that makes this situation so immediately dangerous for Trump's business empire. The judge's ruling allows enforcement mechanisms to proceed even while Trump's appeals are pending. Normally, when you appeal a judgment, there's a stay that prevents the other side from collecting, while the appeals process works its way through the courts. But to get that stay, Trump would need to post a bond for the full amount of the judgment. That's not just showing you have the money somewhere, it's actually putting up collateral that guarantees payment if you lose the appeal. And Trump has apparently been unable or unwilling to post such a bond, which means Letitia James has the green light to pursue enforcement right now. This enforcement situation is going to develop rapidly in the coming months, as James decides whether and when to proceed with liens and seizure actions. Whether Trump can somehow raise the money to post a bond, whether he can reach a settlement, whether James follows through on her threats, all of it will unfold with major implications for Trump's finances, his image, and his political future. And if you think Trump's situation is precarious now, just wait until sheriff's deputies show up at Trump Tower to begin seizure proceedings. The self-proclaimed king of real estate, the man who wrote books about the art of the deal, is facing the very real possibility that his empire will be dismantled piece by piece to satisfy a judgment that resulted from his own fraud. The irony is almost too perfect. Trump spent decades claiming he could get away with anything, that the rules didn't apply to him, that he was too smart to get caught. And now he's facing the consequences of that arrogance in the most public and humiliating way possible. The buildings with his name on them, the symbols of his supposed success, could be taken from him and sold to the highest bidder. The brand he spent a lifetime building could be destroyed in a matter of months. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about legacy. This is about the fundamental question of who Donald Trump really is. Is he the brilliant businessman he's always claimed to be, or is he just another fraud who got caught? The courts have already answered that question with their verdict. Now the enforcement mechanisms are about to make that answer painfully clear to the entire world. The assets will be seized, the properties will be sold, the empire will crumble. And all that will be left is the truth that Donald Trump built his fortune on lies. That's the story that's about to unfold, and it's one that no amount of spinning or denying